Welcome everybody to 2025, to the first of DAG's Spotlight series, to our first programming of the year. It's exciting to be in this new vein of programming in this new year. So my name is Eli Storch. I chair the Design Advocacy Group. And today we're doing something new for DAG. We are calling it the Spotlight series. It is an opportunity to really get in depth, up close and personal with a specific project. So we're really excited to have the folks from DIGSAU here with us today. So we're going to get right into it. We ordinarily do our full run of business, but today I just wanted to go through our upcoming events so folks are aware. We have a lot on the docket. And then we're going to let the team take it away and start to share the project with us. So let me run through. We have our monthly meeting Wednesday, January 22nd. Note that's a Wednesday, not our usual Thursday. That'll be at the Center for Design Philadelphia at 5:30. That is the 250th anniversary of America's independence, celebrated through arts and culture. We have a wonderful group of arts and culture leaders, including Michael Numis, who is leading the 250 efforts out of the mayor's office. So that's going to be a really great group event and our first in-person event of the year. Following that, on Tuesday, February 4th, that'll be our next version of the Spotlight series. We're going to hear from the folks at Kieran Timberlake on their really interesting project at 2300 Market Street. It's adaptive reuse, it's new construction, it's lab, it's there's a lot of challenging, there's reconstruction in it, so excited to see that one. Then we are going into a little mini series. Jesse Lawrence, the new director of planning and development for the city of Philadelphia, is going to be with us in person on Tuesday, February 11th for a one-on-one that our own Laura Spina is going to be leading and sort of emceeing that conversation so that we can all get to know Jesse and some of his plans for the city of Philadelphia. That is, I mentioned a mini series. We're working with Octavia Howell, the new director of the Planning Commission, to lock in a date so that we'll have both of those two new important folks in the realm of the built environment coming to DAG to meet and talk with us and get involved. So look for that one as well. So that was Jesse was February 11th at 5:30. Then our February event, monthly event, will be on the book Building Ghosts. Molly Lester will be presenting at DAG, that really fascinating book that has been opening and being shared around the city. She's got some really cool, wonderful imagery, and she'll be with us to talk about that. Thursday, February 27th from 5:30 to 7. And then our March Spotlight event is already planned. We're sticking with a project, but leaving architecture and moving into an interesting flood mitigation, preparedness, and resilience study that was conducted between organizations in Manayunk and East Falls. So that'll be a really interesting deep dive into how those organizations got together to work on some flood mitigation strategies for their communities. So yeah, we're going big and busy to start 2025. Everything is free to attend and is all linked up on our website. So please head to our website to check all that out. And with that, I will remind you that this is intended to be an opportunity to ask questions and be a little more conversational with our panel. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat. Jesse, please kick us off, take us away, and start off our series here.
Yeah, good to see everybody, and thanks for the warm welcome here. I'll share the screen, and I'm going to kick it over to Mark Sanderson to lead us off.
Good morning, folks. It's nice to see all the friendly faces, and I will absolutely want to encourage folks to ask questions. If you just want to butt in or speak up, more than welcome to do that. But I have the chat open, so you can either write a little note in there, and I'll pause, or Jesse will pause, or you can just put the question in there. So with that, we're just going to jump forward and DIGSAU. This is a project we've been working on, really since maybe late 2015 is when we competed for the commission, and that was a point when the Clay Studio was, really kind of understanding that they had few days left, maybe a year or two left in their current facility, and we'll show some pictures of that. And then we began this process with them, which has continued to today. We still get emails and calls from them, from the team there, wonderful folks and leaders of the Clay Studio. So it's been a real long-standing relationship between DIGSAU and the Clay Studio. So Jesse, you can just kind of like keep the slides cooking along as you hear those pauses. And so for those that maybe don't know DIGSAU, we're located right here in Philly. We're in an open studio. You can we've packed the crowd with several DIGSAU folks, so you can see that open studio that I'm sitting in right now. And so we're around 45 people. We work very much as a team and a collaborative effort when we work on these designs. And we kind of we feel our connection and connectivity to the city, and kind of the working class roots, and the kind of tradition of making and both industry and craft. And so that's something that I think is really true to our heart, and part of the ethos of who we are. That kind of comes at odds, and this is a slide that we show quite often when we're talking about our work, and the way we have kind of come to understand the practice of architecture today is that it's really focused on selecting materials for assembly rather than making, and kind of craft and skilled workers are not as prevalent or highlighted in the way that they once were. And so this selection of kind of manufactured materials from who knows where, oftentimes, we try to track that for lots of different reasons, but they are typically not of a hand or a place or manufactured. They're assembled in ways that lead to, oftentimes kind of placeless or anonymous architecture. At odds with that is the Clay Studio, and that's one of the things that we really loved in terms of starting to begin the conversations with the Clay Studio, was that it is all about making, from the entire spectrum of skill level. They have beginners, they're teaching all sorts of age groups from the city, the craft of ceramics, but at the same time, they have residents, artists in residence, international artists with incredible acclaim, and their footprint in ceramics is really very, very much national, but international as well. And so we really kind of felt connected to that sense of craft and making. So this is the building where it ends up. We're going to go deeper into that, but it's located in South Kensington on American Street. The next slide, I believe, shows a picture of some of its earlier roots. This is the Clay Studio was started, I think, very much. It was a grassroots group of artists that kind of grouped together to create this, kind of place to make art and ceramics, but it grew from there. And they were located over on 2nd Street for many years. That lower middle picture there is a place that maybe if folks had visited, they maybe visited that studio, and it had taken over two kind of, you know, not row houses, but row commercial spaces right along Elfrance Alley there. And the interior was, you know, as you might expect, you know, it was a warren of spaces and storage and studios that had been kind of added onto and collected over the years. That image on the lower left is, you know, kind of shows their store and their gallery space that, you know, kind of shows the higher end of what their product is and of their efforts. But then those two images on the right kind of show just the grittiness and the making. So this was the space. They ran out of space. They were, their lease was coming to an end, and so they needed to come up with another option. Here's some other images: storage in the basement on the right, the sinks, the kilns, etc. So lots of challenges for them to figure out how they wanted to work. And one of the things that they knew, because their spaces were so segregated in these two structures, that the community was not as strong as they wanted it to be. And so that was kind of one of the major goals of this effort, was to kind of build a greater sense of community for them. So we began the search for different locations. We visited, you know, this shows, you know, one alternate location, but we visited maybe 10 or 12, and they visited, you know, many times that, trying to find a location in Philadelphia that was, you know, not going to disconnect them from who they were, but at the same time be a part of a community. And so that was one of the elements that really led to the location in the Kensington site there, which you're seeing on the upper right, which was an open site across from Crane Arts. I think that might be the next image. Kind of up. Now there's the site. You see it. You see across the street on North American, the Crane Arts building, which is a beautiful old kind of industrial structure, and it has a lot of you know, artists and makers and designers in that building now. So there was a little bit of that sense of community there, which has really, I think, grown with the Clay Studio coming to this spot. So the owners of the Crane Arts building actually were the owners of this site, and they gave a favorable you know, purchase price to the Clay Studio in order to get this site, because of their own sense of values. And, you know, if anyone has been up on this portion of North American, it's dramatically different than when we began our project there. There's probably several thousand apartment units, as there are throughout Philadelphia, but this is really a transformed street over that time. So the next image is, you know, again, kind of going back to the sense of making. And Jesse, if you can just keep them rolling a little. So, you know, the sense of this was something, you know, that we began to think about in terms of the hand, how this particular craft is made. There's a sequence to it, and this is something we found really interesting, how to connect the building to the making that happens inside of it. And so those familiar with ceramics know that the first firing leads to a bisqueware. It's kind of a brittle ceramic at that point. It's not yet, it doesn't yet have its durability. It's the second firing that actually brings the kind of strength to the ceramic at that point. But that's also the point when you often do the glazing. There's some ceramics where you don't do the glazing, but that is where the glazing happens, is of the bisqueware. It gets fired again, and you begin to get that incredible chemical reaction of the glaze on the ceramic. So that was a point of inspiration for us. And these are some of those materials that you kind of see in connecting to that, where we wanted to find a brick that kind of communicated the sense of a bisqueware versus a glazed finished brick that we use as a highlight throughout the building. So some of the initial studies of the facade, this was after, this is kind of like midstream in sense of the iterations, but this is an infill site. We needed to get a couple of variances in order to get to the height that we were, and it is an edge-to-edge infill site. So really the facade is a place where originally we were trying to think of ways to kind of communicate the volume of ceramics on the facade. And as we began to get deeper and deeper into kind of filling out their program on that space, it became clear that we needed to be edge to edge right to the street. And so one of the challenges that we took upon ourselves was to figure out how to bring some sense of volume to the facade along American Street. And you can see that in this image here. And Jesse, I think we're handing it off to you here. Is this a spot?
I could certainly jump in. I think we're going to take a quick tour through the building, but I'm also happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So the clay studio, as you could probably get a sense of from some of the initial images, does a lot of things in their building. They have a lot of public spaces, the gallery. They do outreach with the community through a little van that drives around the city called the Claymobile that plugs in with various schools. They do teaching within the building. They have a group of artists that they engage with at various levels. They obviously have a lot of admin, and they do a lot of events along the way. So it quickly became clear to us that we were going to have to organize the program in a way that highlighted all of those elements. In their old space, a lot of that was hidden. People would go to the gallery, they wouldn't realize that it was a school, or they'd shoot up the stairs to the school and not really engage with the gallery. The artists who were making things on a routine level weren't quite as evident as a clay studio would like. So one of the programmatic goals was to design the building, plan the building in a way that the act of making and all of the various programs that they engage with are highlighted at every level, that there's never a place where you don't see someone making something. There's never a place where you don't feel the impact of school and community engagement. So this is the section that starts to show how that program stacked up. And we'll get into this a little bit, but the facade was really designed in a way that it would strive to highlight each of these program elements and almost create like a curio cabinet where you would start to see them from the street, but also once you're in the building, organize them in a way that makes it abundantly clear all the various things that they're doing. We'll start with the basement, which isn't the most exciting space, but is an incredibly important one for them because their storage capabilities were really stretched thin previously and distributed through the whole building, and it led to a sense of chaos in the space. So they actually worked pretty closely with donors to get money for the basement itself. So this is one of their highlights of the project, even though it's not something that most people would see. This is the first floor where you can start to see a constellation of various program elements. The gallery is on the left-hand side. You enter the building through, what in other instances might be more of a gift shop, but they really view as a small wares gallery. And one of the things that's amazing about them is pretty much at any dollar level you can walk in and you can purchase something that's that is of world-class quality. And so their shop space, which is the first space that you enter into, really focuses on those small wares, and then the gallery space on the left is an area that covers more of their
Jesse, if you jump back, I'm going to add a couple other things there. If you could just kind of highlight that small green space in between. Yep. So that particular little space right there opens up into the shop, and it can be converted either into shop space or, more interestingly, it is a little mini artist studio space. So you start to see the color green here. This is one of the levels that actually has a variety of program elements on it. And so that little space right there is a place that they will have artists come in, either the resident artists or visiting artists come and do the work right either on display to the street, or have folks who can come in from the shop and kind of just see them do, making their ceramics right in that space. Yeah. Right above that space is that yellow portion is for the Claymobile, which connects to this small parking zone underneath the building that is focused on the street. That we'll show you some photos of that in a moment, but that is in what is called the pavilion, and it is truly a multi-purpose space, because during the week they'll have the Claymobile or their cars. They'll be moving goods in and out, loading. It's a loading area, all that. But they, on the regular, they open it up to events either right onto the street, or it becomes an event space that's very active. So you'll see how that in the next set of photos, you'll kind of see how these pieces connect.
And that touches on one of the key challenges of the project. The building's 40,000 square feet. As Mark mentioned, we're really maxed out with the largest building footprint that we could get to. They could have easily had a 60,000 square foot building and made use of it. So every area where we could have a space do multiple things, we did, and that parking or pavilion area is one of the key spaces.
And they had a budget for about a 15,000 square foot building.
Yeah, we stretched the dollar. So this is a shot in that shop space. The cup wall, which they're really proud of, is on the right, and that's an area where you can see some of those small wares that I was talking about earlier. And you're looking back into the gallery space. So there's a high level of finish down here. This is one of the few spaces that isn't really rough and tumble and isn't firmly focused on making, much more on the presentation side. Here's a shot within the gallery. Fairly classic gallery space, a lot of overhead structure in place to support hanging things when they want to, but it, really kind of a clean presentation space for the variety of their gallery shows. And here's a glimpse into that events or parking area. This is kind of the day-to-day experience of it, when the Claymobile, which you see on the left, is kind of loading things in and out, and they're using it as a key kind of logistics center. But you can see we elevated the finish in that area to use the glazed brick, so that it really, when it flips over into party mode, it does not seem like a parking lot. It is very clearly, a kind of partially enclosed event space at that point. Moving up to level 2, this is the key classroom space. It's packed to the gills. One of the interesting things is every student who takes a class here gets a cubby. And so what you see in these little, this kind of cellular structures along the hallways and flanking the gallery or the studio spaces are all the cubbies. And so the building was designed to handle 600 students. There's 600 cubbies. If they want to increase that, they need to increase the cubbies. So we packed that space as full as we possibly could. There's a range of gallery spaces, studio spaces for wheel throwing and hand building and all sorts of stuff in here. Kiln areas, prototyping. They have a lot of classes in the program. It's really interesting. And moving up to level 3, this floor is more focused on the artists who are involved at the clay studio. And so the spaces are kind of similar, but they're geared more towards that, and with more dedicated work space, as you can see in the subdivision on the right-hand side. And then one of the things that we were really focused on, coming back to the idea that no space is kind of doing a single thing, and that we're generating a lot of areas where there's community engagement and mixing and people kind of interacting with each other. The spine of the building, the circulation hallways, were really an area that did a lot of work for us, and we're really seen as an extension of the classrooms, really a classroom space in their own right. And what they start to do is they pick up all of the ancillary things that a studio space needs to do. For instance, sinks, and clay pressing, and a whole variety of different tools. So this is a glimpse of that space. So we elevated the finish a little bit so that it would feel very much like the heart of the building. And that also helps to shroud some of the more functional elements within the space that you can see peeking out, a lot of the slop sinks and other areas for staging of various ceramics and so forth. Quick glimpse into the gallery or into the studio spaces. You can see the cubbies. And again, these spaces are really rough and tumble for the most part. What you're seeing, the ceilings are the exposed precast planks. The floors are just the topping slabs. The walls are very straightforward, and the cubbies themselves become one of the key architectural features. That's all Baltic birch, which actually was really hard to get because of the conflict in Ukraine shut down the supply line of that. All right, then coming up to the fourth floor, this is another area where you start to get a little bit more of a range of programs happening. For the most part, it's focused on events. There is a small studio space that you can see up at the top. This is where they do a lot of their after-school programs for kids, but it's also a place where if you wanted to rent it out as an organization, you could take over the space and do team building exercises and things like that. And then there's a large covered or open roof deck and some administrative spaces up there. So here it is in after school mode. Kids all over the place. This is one of the most fun times to be there because there's just so much life, and it really captures kids' imaginations, I think, to be able to be in this building, but also get these incredible views back to the city at large. More quiet moment. Okay, so I'm going to pivot for just a second here.
And a quick, I am just going to jump in. I saw a question in the chat there. So the question was, when do we learn about Roberto Lugo's massive mural that you see as you drive up American Street? And that was something that was introduced probably, I think the idea of a mural started maybe in construction, and the construction for this project went on and on and on. And I think the design and the integration of Roberto, who actually has a lot of connection to the clay studio, that happened kind of later in the process. So we saw that mural kind of come to life later in the process during construction. I don't know if there's a follow-up to that.
Yeah, I wonder, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wondered too if DIGSAU was involved. That was my question. Whether you were involved in the jurying process. I think that was an awesome choice, but
yeah, we were not. Mm-hmm. No. And it is something that has as much of an impact or more of an impact than the architecture as you drive up American Street. And that's the nature of kind of murals on buildings. It is a party wall. So the wall was flat. I think you're going to see some construction shots that Jesse will show that we'll show it before the mural went in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to pivot then from some of the design goals and talk a little bit about the technical challenges of this facade, notably the brickwork. And Mark, if you don't mind monitoring the chat, feel free to interrupt, and I'll answer questions mid-stride here. But for the sake of time, I'll just blitz this as quickly as I can because we got a bit to get through. One of the things that was very clear to us, though, at the onset of designing this project was that we wanted to engage with masonry and brick conventions as much as we possibly could, just as we were really inspired by all the ceramic arts that were taking place in the building. We've always been inspired by the history of brickwork in Philadelphia, by the skill level and craft of masons. And that was one of our key goals. We wanted to push the limits of that, but we we're not interested in engaging with, robot arms or any of the more cutting edge technologies that you see impacting masonry. We really wanted to situate this building in Philly in a long continuum and in a craft language that spoke directly to that history in Philadelphia and also to what was happening in the interior of the building. So initially, we got into the brick code where a lot of that convention is enumerated and described in kind of mathematical proportions. Coffering was one of the key elements that we knew we wanted to engage with, and so we started to look at what the prescriptive code requirements are for a coffer. And these are all done in the service of not imposing strange loads on backup assemblies in a conventional cavity wall. And we found really two limitations. One is the limitation of how much you can corbel an individual brick per course. And there's two things that govern that. One is dividing the depth of the brick by 3, and the other is the height of the brick by 2. That's what you see in the center image. And then is the maximum amount of projection for the entire run of corbel that you can get, which is really shallow in the prescriptive values. It's the depth of a brick divided by 2. And so this is simply looking at both of those versions. What you see in the center would be the maximum amount of corbeling or depth that we'd be able to get within the facade if we followed strictly the prescriptive path. You can see just under 2 inches, not enough to do the kind of volumetric things that we wanted to do with the facade, as Mark described. We were heading more into like the 7 to 9 range, which is starting to show up on the right-hand side. And it became clear to us that we were going to have to engineer the corbel beyond the prescriptive values within the brick code to do that. It means every element of the facade, the ties, the backup assemblies, and so forth, ultimately would need to be engineered. And so this is a diagram that we did early on, trying to regularize the facade as much as possible, coming up with modules that we could deploy. So we would get the range and expression that we wanted within the facade, but it was really playing by a system of simple rules. We came up with 3 different modules and ultimately, deployed those in a pattern that we felt like stopped the eye in interesting ways, but actually provided a little bit of a simple common framework for the facade. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to walk through quickly a series of the various bearing elements and how the various components of the building work together. So the building is a blend of precast planks for all the horizontal structure and a load-bearing tube steel frame. What you're seeing in blue is the tube structure that supports the brick, highlighted on top of the brick pattern itself. The bricks get relieved at every level. So we're really only trying to carry 1 story of brick foundation and then every level up. And within that, also trying to limit the amount of large openings that would require supplemental. So you can see a few instances where the openings exceeded what we could do with a loose lintel. So we start to get a secondary lintel tied back to structure that supports that. And as we got in a little bit to what that backup assembly would look like, we evaluated 3 different ways of dealing with a cold form assembly that could support the depth of that facade. Ultimately, because we had about 7.5 inches of depth, that brick load was going to put a little bit of overturning into the cold form. It wasn't only dealing with the kind of lateral wind forces that a backup assembly would typically deal with. And so we needed to come up with a strategy that could handle all that. The first thing we looked at, which would be the most conventional cold form that you see on the left, would be just to run it plumb, vertical, straight down the building, and have the brick itself be where all the geometry is carried. That would require a lot of variation in the brick ties, probably an unreasonable amount, and it also wouldn't give the masons any geometry that they could play off of. They would really have to lay that brick up almost blind, which we saw as a real challenge. An alternative to that in the center would be to slope all of that framing, but that creates really complicated detailing on the cold form side and pushes cold form out of what's really feasible. And so where we landed was an approach that you see on the right-hand side, where we used a double layer of cold form. We had an internal layer that's plumb and straight and designed to handle all of the loads it needed to do, and then a much thinner, lighter layer on the exterior that provides the geometry. So the masons were given effectively a template through the backup assembly that carried all of the geometry. And it worked out pretty well. So I'm going to just go through a quick series of slides here that show that three-dimensionally. So here's the tube frame. You can see an integrated brick shelf embedded in an upturned HSS beam. Here's the first layer of cold form being added to that. Second layer of cold form for the geometry. Then we start to get sheathing applied to that. Now you can start to see the geometry a little bit clearer, and then a conventional assembly going on top of that, all the way out to the bricks themselves. How we would handle some of the brick transitions at the key moments of geometry became a real talking point. This was our first pass at it, where we were looking at pretty much every course. This diagram here follows from the head of the window and covers every course as you work through the diagonal. And we were looking at how cut bricks could be used to achieve that. For the most part, the building's on module, but there was no way to maintain the module in that dimension without having custom bricks, which we couldn't afford. So our initial thought was to embed all of the cut bricks within that angular joint. I'll circle back to this a little bit down the line. And for those of you who are curious about achieving a loose lintel in an angular geometry, we did have to inflect the loose lintels to carry that geometry, and we worked with the engineers to kind of push the limits of that, and ended up being easier than we'd initially thought. One of the last things that we were looking at within the design process was how to if we wanted to manipulate the bond further. These are a couple of studies on the left-hand side that showed adjusting the bond or displacing bricks within a conventional running bond. And what we quickly found was that was the wrong design move. It panelized the facade, it took away from the volumetrics of it. And really where we landed, which is what was built, was that it was the brick itself that we thought should really carry a degree of variation and an expression of craft. So what you see there on the right is the varied bricks that we ended up using. I'll run through some construction shots. So here you can see this is the steel topped out. You can see some of the supplemental lintels that carry the larger openings. And on the right-hand side, you can see the precast planks engaging with the upturned beams. We ran through some quick mock-ups of the cold form and found that it was actually a really simple thing to do. We were concerned about it during the documentation process. Cold formers were great. They worked with us, and we found ways to refine it even further. So you can see how slender some of the exterior members got once the cold form engineers took over and did their delegated design. So as that went up, it was really interesting to see the skeleton of the building start to emerge and the geometry, and it ended up being one of the more seamless aspects of the design. You can also see we had a real significant fire retardant treated plywood buck that carried all the windows in the openings. But for the most part, it's like an incredibly conventional cold form backup assembly with a little bit of unconventional secondary layer being added to it. Here's the building wrap starting to go on and the enclosure getting to the point where the brick's ready to roll. And this is where a lot of engagement with the masons was required to contour the bricks exactly how we wanted to. So we ran actually through 3 mock-ups before we got it right. The first version on the left was the first pass of the masons kind of trying to regularize the bond as much as possible. They actually weren't following our documents. They wanted to do a quick test without adjusting the location of the cut bricks and keeping them in kind of a static spot. But what you can start to see is it was really hard for them to achieve a nice crisp angle at the diagonal. So the next iteration of it, they followed our drawing. So you can start to see the cut bricks moving through that angle, very similar to what you can start to see here highlighted. But what we were finding is that we were trying to exert too much control over them. The cut bricks weren't great. They gave you kind of a connected dots reading of it that really highlighted any inconsistencies in the angle. And so the third version that you see on the right was the final iteration of this that was deployed on the building. And this was us working with the masons. We realized that if we allowed them to cut bricks in a way that was more conducive to maintaining the alignment of that angle and happened somewhat randomly, you almost couldn't even find them in here. We limited them to not cutting a brick less than 1/3. So if you really look, you can find some instances of that. But at the end of the day, it really just gets absorbed into the pattern and texture of the brick in a way that gave them the flexibility that they needed to get a really crisp angle. So that's what you're seeing here. It came out really nicely at the end. Some shots of them beginning to lay this out. The first pass on the building was tricky. It's one thing to get it right on a mock-up, another thing to get it right in the field. So you can see some areas that ultimately had to get adjusted in the future. That area on the upper right had too much waver and they had to take it down. But for the most part, it went really, really cleanly. You know, we were really happy with it. There's some degree of precision in this, so the corners look nice and crisp. But on the other hand, there's a good amount of variation that we think really speaks to handcraft and provides a lot of surprise and human touch to the building. So here you can see both the effect of those varied bricks with sunlight raking across them, and then a sense of what the the coffers looked like as they were advanced further. And here's the building almost complete. Here's the brick topping out, and then
the view without the mural there. And let's just kind of bring it to a close so we can open up for questions, Jesse.
Yeah, that's really it. So here's here's the final image. Again, we were really happy with the balance that we achieved with the masons between precision and crispness and that human touch. And we know the Clay Studio has been really happy with the building as well. So yeah, with that we'll rest and we'll get into any discussion.
I have a few. So first off, this was when we came to you guys with the prompt for this. This was exactly what I was hoping for. So getting into the nitty gritty and what was the thing in your studio that made everyone crowd around and say, what do we need to do here? So this was, thank you for sharing so much of that detail and that information. So very exciting, and I appreciate you sharing. One thing, before we jump into questions, can you just name the design and construction team, give them their little shout out, talk a little bit more about that collaboration?
Yeah, we worked with Jeffrey M. Brown, who many of you have worked with. They're were, I should say, a Philly construction team that had been around for a long time. They were brought into the project early, and were engaged as a CA. I think probably about halfway through the design development phase. And they carried it through to completion. The masons, there was a variety of masons. I think there were 3 different masons on the facade. They were trying to put it up really, really quickly. It was a very complicated building, and there was a point at which the Clay Studio was going to be a homeless organization if it didn't get done quickly. So I actually cannot remember every mason who was on the project, because it was a little bit of an all hands on deck initiative.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You talked a little bit about some cost control measures. Those of us who have worked with nonprofits and other organizations know that the challenges of getting these buildings done. Yet there is a lot of complexity and construction intrigue in this building. So can you talk about some of the ways in which you were actually able to accomplish the project?
Yeah, I would say it started with really condensing their program down to its absolute necessity and core, and that resulted in us trying to find as many ways that we could kind of cleverly use spaces for more than one function. All that being said, once they launched and they opened up the studio, they have a waiting list for their classes now that is several months long. They've been incredibly successful in their both their fundraising and their movement forward. And as most organizations that kind of find that success, they've immediately, they very quickly decided that they made it too small, although they absolutely could not have added another foot. And we were stretching their funds, and it was a really fraught construction process. So the very first point was that kind of condensing of the program. The second one is in the bidding. I think one of the things that Jeffrey Brown did is they had kind of opened up a very wide range of contractors and subcontractors into field. That led to a variety of quality issues throughout the construction. I think that was the core, the secondary part of what Jesse was talking about with the multiple masons on the project is that the speed with which they were moving was just not quick enough. And so those are two elements that are very specific. And then this image here, I think, is one that just shows, it's a very raw building. I mean, it's plank construction. We wanted to use plywood that we knew could be durable and could take a beating. The floors are concrete. We do have some acoustic ceiling panels, but those started to get value engineered out. So I think at every level but all that being said, it's an incredibly robust, complex building because of there's the mechanical system for the building is very complicated and high end because of all the silicates and the filtration that needs to happen in the building. The kilns, generate a tremendous amount of heat, but that comes with the necessity of a lot of power. There's just a lot of elements to the building that just couldn't be value engineered. So, we took every point that we could.
So folks, if you want to raise your hands or drop questions in the chat, I'll get to them. I did have a follow-up on that. There are some famous examples of institutions getting the building they wanted and then not being able to maintain it at long term. How have you guys worked with the Clay Studio to make sure the building is part event space, something that they can monetize and help make sure that they can have the longevity that they want in the space?
I would say that our relationship to the Clay Studio, started as a pretty standard architectural commission with a client and the designer and the architect. But over time, our connection to them and our relationship and dedication to them kind of grew to the point that this moved into more of a pro bono project for our office. And I think that has continued. So that, like I said at the very beginning, they will call us kind of on the regular when they want to make an adjustment or they want to tweak the building or they want to do something different. Just last month we were sending them some sketches and drawings for some other things. And so it's a long-standing relationship we have with them. And they're just such a terrific organization. We try to support them. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
no, absolutely. It is.
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that by saying, along with the kind of rough and tumble details or materials of this, all the utility systems are exposed throughout the building. So anytime that they need to modify something, they're not ripping finishes out to get access to something. It's all right there. If they need to subdivide a space, which they've done in some instances, as new program comes in, it's easy enough for them to tap into, the existing ductwork to tie into an existing fire protection line or things of that nature. So because everything is very direct and very exposed, it means that they can evolve in the kind of like DIY nature that is so embedded in their ethos.
And they have come a really long way with their fundraising. So I think there was a shift of the executive director through the process, and the new executive director kind of got their legs under them and has become a kind of a powerful voice for representing the Clay Studio and fundraising. So I think they've been really successful because they've shown the impact that they're making. And the other thing that they're really have an incredible reputation for their connection to the community, the South Kensington, the Kensington community, and beyond with the tentacles of the clay studio. So a really great organization.
Nika, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Sure. Just considering this is such a unique program, I was just wondering if there was any design solution that you were most excited about, just with the particular problems that might have popped up.
Jesse, I'll let you add to it, but I actually think this particular image happened to be nicely on the space, on the place that really, I think, was a watershed moment in the design. We were really kind of shoving 10 pounds of material into a 5-pound bag, and it just was not working. And we just kept coming back to Jen Martin and the studio folks and just saying, all right, what about the, and they said, no, we need more seats, we need more coveys. And this is like, it doesn't work without it. And we said, well, your budget also doesn't work with it. So how are we going to make this come together? And in this particular space where we pulled all of those utility elements out of the studio spaces and put them into this shared corridor that created the moment of collaboration and connection between the studios and solved the functional need and became more efficient, I think was just kind of one of the keys to unlocking so many different elements for them.
Very cool. Thank you.
So, interesting question here from Jack about that slide you showed with the 3 different mock-ups of the brick. Once some of those, I'll read it. It seems loosening the control resulted in a better end product. Did this require increased site visits or different types of communications to set expectations or control point alignments?
Yeah, we were there. I mean, it was nice that the building up in Kensington is so close to our office. We can be on site in 10 minutes, and so we were there constantly while the brickwork was going up. Each one of these instances, before the first version was erected, we met on site, we talked to the masons, we heard how they wanted to do it, and it resonated with us. And I think they were probably a little bit hesitant to get too far with us before really trying it out on their own. And so they went for it, and we met and we kind of walked really through every little instance of this that we thought was working out well, everything that we thought wasn't working well, and then worked with them to try and streamline it. So that second version, they'd kind of learned a lot from the first version, saw ways that they could improve, and then we had our own aesthetic goals for it too, involving the location of those cut bricks. So we worked with it. It seemed like it was likely feasible, but it posed certain challenges. I think one of the things about it too is that there's a range of skill levels, and it's always understood by us that we need to engage really directly with the folks who are making our buildings to make sure that we're not kind of trying to push somebody out of what's really possible. We knew that the general design of this building was deliverable and achievable and could be done really, really well. But had we not listened to the masons who were out there working, especially when we went through that second round and come up with ways, as you suggested, to kind of loosen the amount of control that we were trying to exert, meet them where they were, learn from the 2 instances on the left, and come up with something that was much more synthetic of the dialogue that we've been having. We hit exactly the what we wanted to achieve, even if the specifics of it were a little bit different. That's something that we try to bring to our buildings as much as we possibly can. On the one hand, we need to provide enough information in our documentation set, enough clarity to how things want to go, to make sure that we're not running into a challenge on the site. And I think where we landed certainly could have been done that way. we could have done a third iteration that was just a refinement of the second, but I think in this instance, we really wanted to work a little bit more closely with them and find that sweet spot between our goals and their abilities, and I think it worked out really well.
Wonderful. So, go ahead.
I'll just I'll very quickly just add to that I think that's one of the consistent challenges of construction today is when to, your documentation, which is so specific and contractual and has all these expectations, and it doesn't yet have the benefit of the skill of those who are installing it, who know the materials and know everything more about this material than we ever could. And so trying to find those opportunities for us to listen to them and to learn and kind of bring that into the project is a challenge that we're kind of have our eyes open to all the time. And this is true of almost any material.
So let's finish it with a material question. I had one, and Maxim and I are right on the same wavelength here, talking about material selection. You started off with the bisqueware versus the glazeware. Are there any other instances of the glazeware other than in that parking event space that you showed? Can you talk about what the actual uniqueness of the brick that was finally selected was, and any other specific unique materials that are in this project?
I'll just start with the brick itself. And this was, I think because we were on such a budget, it was very hard to find brick that we could afford that kind of gave the quality that we were hoping to get out of that brickwork. And so there was a long discussion about red brick versus kind of this more kind of earthy bisqueware type of tonal quality to it that we felt was really important for the building, and also to be able to highlight the differences of those two types. The highlighted brick, the glazed brick, and Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, is that a Heath, or is it who was it who made that?
That was McNear.
Oh, McNear made it.
He's
Okay.
out of the Bay Area in California.
And so they have a really wide range of, the glazing has a lot of variation. The texture on the brick has a lot of variation, and so it's a really interesting kind of but expensive brick. So we had to be very judicious about how we used it. And so the two places it got used were those public spaces for the event. So kind of the outside shell is the bisqueware, the inside special spaces, the ground floor pavilion, as they call it, and then the roof deck. You're seeing some of the orange stucco, but it also has highlights of that brick up on the rooftop terrace. So those are the two spots that got the special brick. And just trying to find those couple of spaces when you elevate the finish. Other than that, the brick itself, we looked at dozens and dozens of bricks, trying to get the right tone, the texture, the color. One of the things we liked about this one is it did have this kind of almost like thumbprints of the in the texture of the brick, which we thought was a nice nod to what they do in the building.
One thing that was interesting with the glazed brick, we had samples in our office that we loved, that we showed the client, that everybody was really happy with. And in the years that the project developed, they jettisoned the glazing type. The original glaze was very lead heavy, and they got rid of all the lead. And ultimately, we had to work with McNear. I want to say they did 6 or 7 different iterations of trying to find a new glaze mix with us that hit the range that you start to see here, where there's some yellows, there's some really warm tones, there's even this kind of like ashy white quality to the brick in certain instances, and something that had that level of variation and warmth to it. So at the end of the day, it was a fully customized glazing.
Wonderful. Well, we are at time, folks. I'll ask you to turn on your video if you can, and give these guys a round of applause. Thank you for your team and this presentation. you've certainly set a good marker for this series, and we really appreciate it.
And thank you. And it's great to have the opportunity to speak to folks, and we'll be sure to attend future events. So.
Well, everyone have a great week. Go visit the Clay Studio, and we will see you on the 22nd in person.
Hey, Ian,
Have a good one.
Ian, could I ask one question?
Oh, Craig, jump in.
And then this is a question for Mark. Mark, have you ever had a private developer for the projects you've worked on who would get into this level of design detail in terms of the expression of the building? I know that a lot of the great work you've done at the Navy Yard, but I have a hard time imagining another private developer going to this level on the client side. Have you had any?
I think we do have quite, the Gattuso team down at the Navy Yard ensemble team, they get into a lot of detail. And then I think we have another developer we work with, BPG down in Wilmington. And, I think we're the developers who care about the design kind of tend to find us, and the ones that are maybe a little more focused on the monetary efficiency of their development, maybe don't avoid us is the way to say that. But yeah, so we have a lot of good long-standing relationship with developers who do care about their materials as well.
Great. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everyone, and have a good day.
Yep. Everyone have a good one.
Good job, Eli, everybody.